Afternoon, everyone. I am Whitney Dameron, Chair of the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks Commission. We appreciate you all being here, our guests that are on Zoom, as well as the secretary and staff. I believe we begin these meetings with introductions. Again, I'm Whitney Dameron, recently appointed by Governor Laura Kelly, and I'm from Topeka. I'm going to pass it down to my left to Commissioner Sporer to introduce himself. I would note that Commissioner G. Feller and Commissioner Lista are participating via Zoom.
Troy Sporer, Oakley.
Emmerich Cross, Kansas City.
Lauren Quayle Sill, Hutchinson.
Phil Escarino, Garden City.
Thank
Delia
you,
Lister,
everyone.
Pittsburgh.
What's that? Yeah.
Okay, Sheila Camus, commission support.
Jason Dixon, commission support.
Christopher Kennedy, Secretary.
Stuart Schrog, Deputy Secretary of Operations.
Dan Riley, Chief Counsel.
Mr. Secretary and staff, is there any additions or deletions to the agenda in front of us today?
There is a revised agenda on the table. Martin could not be here to present the legislative update. He said there is no change from the previous presentation at the March meeting. So we'll skip over that item when we get to that.
Very good. We now have approval of the March 28th, 24 meeting minutes. I was not a commissioner at that point in time, so I won't vote on that matter, but we'll bring that up to the commissioners if there's any changes, amendments, or a motion to approve.
Commissioner Sill, I move to approve.
Commissioner Escarino, second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Minutes are accepted. I believe we now are at the stage of the agenda for the department report. So public hearing, administrative rules and regulations. I would turn it over to the secretary and to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, visiting and viewing publics. Today, we'll be providing the information to set Kansas 2024-25 waterfowl hunting seasons. Commission consensus is required today in order to submit season selections to the Fish and Wildlife Service by May 1st. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service develops frameworks that establish maximum bag limits, possession limits, seasons lengths, earliest and latest closing dates. The briefing item contains how the federal frameworks are developed and the framework restrictions. States must operate within these frameworks when establishing state-specific migratory game bird regulations. At the state process, the selection of waterfowl season dates are different than our other resident game species, as well as webless migratory species, in that they are not adopted via set regulations, but rather through adoption by commission consensus. This is due to the season variability and the later time frame for which these seasons are developed and are addressed. Kansas officially adopts its seasons through KDWP's commission consensus and its annual season selection letter to Fish and Wildlife Service. In the briefing item is a summary of the 2024-25 federal frameworks. There are no changes in the federal frameworks from the previous year. The frameworks still remain in the Little Duck Harvest package, as well as Little prescriptions for geese. In 2021, incorporating decision structure tools to assist in the season setting process by identifying important season date parameters for each of Kansas waterfowl zones. This process is developed for season selection stability, reduced bias, and transparency in the season date selection process. In the briefing item are the staff recommendations for Kansas 2024-25 waterfowl seasons. They are as follows. Similar to previous years, staff is recommending a 9-day season in the High Plains beginning the third Saturday of September and a 16-day seasons for the Low Plains beginning the second Saturday of September. The difference in days between the High Plains and Low Plains is due to the 23 additional days afforded to the 75-day general duck season of the High Plains unit and the 107 days season restriction of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Staff recommendations are again to hold 2 consecutive days for youth, veterans, and active military, and to those days to be held simultaneously. Staff recommends that they are held 1 week prior to the opening day of the general duck zones in each of those respective Kansas duck zones. As previously mentioned, staff incorporates season decision-making tools to assist in season date selection and review of migration patterns, harvest, hunter activity, habitat conditions, weather patterns, holidays, hunter surveys, hunter communications, and other variables. Staff believe this structure provides the best overall opportunity for Kansas' varied waterfowl hunting communities. On the slide and in the briefing items are the recommended season dates for the Kansas 2024 waterfowl seasons. Staff recommends, again, goose season's recommendations are similar to the past seasons. Staff continues to recommend a 6-day Canada goose daily bag limit. Consistent with past seasons, staff recommends a 15-day falconry season in Kansas low plains zones. Due to the Migratory Treaty Act 107-day restriction, additional hawking days are unavailable in High Plains unit. 2024 is a leap year, so there is 1 day later start than last year. Would like to update the commissioners on some upcoming items. This fall, the KWP will be hosting a series of public meetings as well as conducting a broad-scale waterfowl hunter survey. This is being done to gather hunter feedback on several items like season dates, preferences, zone boundaries, bag limits, and other items. Every 5 years, the Fish and Wildlife Service allows states to make changes to their duck zone boundaries. 2025 is the next open season. Kansas duck zone boundaries will be part of the commission discussion beginning in the winter of 2025. The only difference from previous staff recommendations is just due to calendar shift. This does open the goose split from 2 to 9 days. And again, would like to remind the commission that season selections are due to the Fish and Wildlife Service May 1st, so action is required this evening. Thank you for your attention, and I'll stand for any questions.
Have those meetings been set for?
Meeting dates have not been set yet.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? I believe the agenda says consensus. Is there any action we need to take?
Yes, Mr. Chair, yeah, historically, the commission does vote to accept the proposal from Tom in terms of these recommendations. We don't promulgate them into a Kansas regulation, but adopt the recommendation, the standards of the federal.
Very good. Thank you. I would accept the motion in that regard.
So move, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We're now at the point for general public comment on non-agenda items. Are there members who wish, members in the audience who wish to speak? If so, please come forward and identify yourself for the record and state your purpose.
My name is, excuse me, Tom Dill from Salina, Kansas. Used to serve on this commission for
Welcome.
years.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So just wanted to bring a note, a little bit of express my displeasure of the regulation that was passed for non-resident turkey hunting last year. Because I think it limited, well, I know it limited the youth. In the past years, I'd taken two of my 3 grandsons from Nebraska. This year, that wasn't an option. When my 3 sons graduated from high school, I was fortunate to be able to gift each one of them a lifetime or a Kansas lifetime hunting. So wherever they live, Colorado, Illinois, Chicago, they could come back and hunt. However, 8 of my 11 grandchildren don't live in Kansas. And so that limits the opportunity for them to come back. Primarily deer and turkey is what we hunt. I know from emailing and getting some information back from Jake George that probably 25% of the non-resident youth did not get a tag this year. Whereas there was about 17% of the remaining that did not get a tag. So unfortunately, you limited the youth and the ability to have youth come back to hunt. I also would advocate, and I don't know whether it would be regulation or statute, the fact that if you were a landowner, tenant, lineal descendant, you could still get a youth tag. It's a landowner, tenant, lineal descendant youth tag. Not all, not adults, but youth. If we want to encourage and have as many young people coming back and hunting as possible, I think that would be worthwhile. The fact is I'm not the only one that has grandchildren living elsewhere. And so a lot of grandparents have their families living somewhere else. So whether you could do it via statute or regulation and not having to go through the statute, if you have to go statute through the legislature, this year's shot, next year's shot. But a certain number of permits need to be allocated specifically for youth, even if you leave it as a non-resident draw. But I would advocate for a lineal descendant youth for a landowner tenant. So just wanted to bring that up because you may not be aware how many people actually of the youth were not allowed to get a tag this year. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. Jake or whoever, those who were not successful this year in that non-resident turkey draw, do they get preference points so that then next year they
That is correct.
are fairly certain to get a tag?
Yes, Jake George, Wildlife Division Director, that is correct. If they did put in for the draw and were unsuccessful, they do get a preference point, which would likely guarantee them a tag next year.
Okay, thank you.
Jake, while you're there, do we know the number of youth that applied for tags that did not get a tag?
There were 1,009 youth applicants, 747 youth permits issued, plus 2 youth permits issued as leftovers in Unit 2, which I believe comes out to about 260 non-resident youth applicants who were unsuccessful in either the draw or obtaining a leftover permit.
Okay, so do we know out of state do we know that out of state number? Did you say that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, they would all be out
Be
of state.
included in that? Okay.
Yes, yeah, that's all non-residents, correct?
Oh, non-resident. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I thought you said resident.
No, non-resident.
Okay, thank you.
Jake, would you repeat that, the total number?
Sure. 1,009 youth applicants for the non-resident draw,
Okay,
747 youth permits issued, plus 2 additional that were over the counters leftovers. So about 260 non-resident youth applicants who were unsuccessful in either.
thank you.
Any additional public comments from those in the audience? Yes.
Norman Reynolds, Solana. Have you seen the 22-23 issue of Audubon Society of Kansas? Look on page 47. Need to read it. Hazard to our insects, birds, and entire ecosystems. The chemicals and insecticides and pesticides that we're putting on their grain seed is what's causing the problem. That's why we ain't got any birds, any insects, nothing out there. There's no birds out there. There's no insects out there. It's killing everything. And we're going to eat that stuff. Even one company here in this area that produces and sells seed, he says, we don't care. Got another one for you. I get this magazine. You ought to see what regulations are coming to. Subscribe to that. I get it for nothing. I call the assistant editor out in Colorado. She sends it to me. All the regulations, and it applies here about your water. We're out of water. We ain't got no water in this country. So you better learn to quit sucking all that water out of the ground. I've been to places in South America where it rains 72 inches of rain a year. We're running out of water. We're gonna be importing our food from them. They put a combine in the field down there, they put 20, 25 combines in the field at the same time. The land just goes forever. I've been there. They got resources that we don't got. We used to have, but we're using them all up. So it's 2024. It's not 1924 anymore. We can't do what we think we can. We're not entitled to it.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Allen? Any further comments from the audience? Jason, do we have anyone online with a question?
We do not.
Very good. Mr. Secretary, we're now at the point of the agenda where we get to hear from you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Secretary Christopher Kennedy. Chairman, Commissioners, staff, and members of the public. I'm pleased to be here for my second Kansas Wildlife and Parks Commission meeting. Since my first meeting with you all, I've gotten to know a few more faces in the audience, and I hope for those of you that I've yet to meet that we get together very soon, preferably holding a fish, walking through a prairie, or waiting on a turkey. Given how fast my first 6 weeks have passed, I'm not confident I'll get much time afield in the upcoming weeks, but that's all right, because we've got a lot of challenging and worthwhile work ahead of us. Before we delve into any specifics, I think it would be beneficial for our newest commission chair, as well as myself and anyone else who may be joining a Kansas and Wildlife and Parks Commission meeting for the first time, to go over a little bit about what we're here to contribute. For some of you, commission meetings are old hat, and I can appreciate that. For some of us, we are charting somewhat newish territory, so a quick refresher can't hurt. The relationship between the commission, the department, and the public is a symbolic one, meaning when everything is working as it should, every party involved should benefit in some capacity from our shared interactions. You as commissioners have been charged with serving as a regulatory body for the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, advising the department, led by a secretary, on planning and policy issues that impact the general administration of the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, to exclude issues related to personnel. Led by your chairman, our two entities have a shared mission of conserving and enhancing Kansas wildlife and its habitats, ensuring current and future generations appreciate and enjoy these living resources and associated recreation, while informing the public of the status of Kansas natural resources, gaining understanding and support in achieving this mission. Much like a chairman, it is my duty to ensure that we stay on track, that the department provides the expertise, the data, and support necessary to uphold our end of this shared mission, and that decisions with the department work on the behalf of the public and on the behalf of our natural resources, utilizing sound science and a diplomatic process for decision-making. If we continue to prioritize the science, we continue to work together on our shared mission, and we continue to solicit value and integrate feedback from the public, I'm confident that we will reach the right solutions moving forward. Now on to funding, the funding that makes this good work possible. Our state's fiscal status report. We are approaching the 10th month mark in the fiscal year 2024. This means that our staff will be devoting these last 2 months to showing up any outstanding purchases and approvals that need to be carried out before we enter the fiscal year 2025. No small task, to be certain. Our park fee fund which, as many of you know, is revenue is derived from state park interest fees, camping fees, and annual vehicle passes to our state parks, brought in $1,163,188 for the month of March. This is an 8% decrease compared to March of last year. The fiscal year to date, our park fee stands at $6.9 million, a 22% increase compared to this same time last year. The cash balance of our cabin fee fund, which is revenue derived from parks and public land cabin rentals, sits at $1.9 million. The total revenue from our rentals for the month of March was $146,497, a 29% decrease from this same time last year. The wildlife fee fund, which, as you all know, is funded by the sale of hunting and fishing license, big game permits, and tags to include non-resident purchases, brought in $981,013 in March. That account balance now sits at $17.3 million, which is a 1.5% decrease compared to this same time last year. Our boating fee fund, derived from vessel registrations and renewals, saw $135,796 in revenue last month. Fiscal year to date, the cash balance of our boating fee fund sits at $2.6 million, a 14% increase compared to this same time last year. It's worth noting that this report is merely one of revenue, not of one of expenses, which are undoubtedly great in order to run an organization of this size and manage the public lands, waters, and state parks that we do. Therefore, I conclude my report by sharing that our executive management team is already making budget preparations, especially those related to capital improvement projects for the next several years, to ensure that we do not rest on our laurels, nor do we operate under the assumption that every year will be like this year's revenue or last year's revenue. If the COVID-19 pandemic didn't teach us anything, is that our outdoor use can change in a moment's notice, for better or for worse. So as your new secretary, our physical fitness will remain a top priority of mine moving forward, so that we may continue the good work while being prepared for the future. At this point, I would turn it over to Martin DeBoer, who is, as Sherry said, is not here today and doesn't have anything to contribute to report on the legislative affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'll take prerogative and I'll contribute on the legislative portion of this. I would note that the final day of the regular session, there were still discussions on potential changes to the commission makeup. As legal counsel Terry Bruce would note, it's not over until it's over. Legislature is back in town today, probably concludes its business by Tuesday. I think it's unlikely that there are changes passed, but I would also say it's not impossible. With that, I think we're on to section C of the agenda. We have fishing regulations with Brian Sowards to address the group. Mr. Sowards.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Brian Sowards, Fisheries Division Director. A lot of what I have for you today in the general discussion part is 115.25.14 and portions of it. The first one on here, 115.25.14 BA and BB, referred to the trout type 1 waters and type 2 waters and the trout season. If you'll remember from the general discussion last time that we had discussed that Kansas does not produce our own trout. We buy those from commercial vendors and the costs are going up. And so some of those proposed solutions that we're proposing to the commission were, one, to truncate that season from November 1 through April 15 to December 1 through the end of March. That has not moved to workshop. We backed that up and it is in the general discussion again today because it has to go along with all the other 115.25.14 regulations. The permit increase is the other side of it. And that will be in the workshop today, so I'll be back to discuss that. But I'll just start working through this and stop me when you have any questions. For the first one is 115-2514 BA. That's to change the date of the trout season for type 1 waters to the new season, which is proposed to be December 1 through March 31st. Okay, and 115-2514 BB, we want to remove this particular regulation. This is for Unit 30 in the mine lands. This is a popular trout fishery, and it used to be open, or you used to have a permit all year round. You'll see there November 1 through October 31st. We changed this a couple of years ago to fit within the regular type 1 waters. So you'll have to have a permit at mine land Unit 30 during the normal trout season. So we just needed to clean that up. That's what that one's about. 115-2514C is for the type 2 waters. The difference with type 2 compared to type 1, everybody during the trout season, if they're fishing there, has to have the trout permit. A type 2 is if you're fishing for trout and possessing trout during the trout season, you have to have a permit. You can go fish for bluegill or something else and not have to have the permit during that time. So for the type 2, we want to change the date of the trout season there as well to December 1 through March 31st. Second change there is to add Shawnee Mission Park Lake and Kill Creek Park Lake in Johnson County to that list of type 2 trout water bodies. We've recently been approached and partnered with Johnson County to work together on providing trout and other fishing opportunities in Johnson County, which is pretty exciting. They've kind of done things by themselves for a long time, but they're very eager to partner with us, which I think will be very beneficial given the number of constituents, the potential trout permit holders, fishing license holders that are in Johnson County. So we're eager to start that partnership this year. Shall I go on to the?
I have a question, Brian. And forgive me, this is, I feel a little ignorant asking this, but with those type 2 waters where you can be fishing for anything, only need to have the permit if you're going to possess. That's correct?
I believe that's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Does that present any issues for law enforcement in that regard? Is there it could be a little sticky?
You know, Commissioner Sill, I'm sure it does, but if anybody with more law enforcement knowledge on the issue wants to speak to that, I'd be fine with it.
I'm captain of Region 1. Don't really have too much of that out west. I have heard of it can be complicated in certain areas.
Yeah.
Having the permit and not, someone else possessing and passing fish.
What is the rationale for having those type 2 waters?
I believe the rationale was to not limit opportunity. So these are lakes that we've identified that have multiple opportunities, whether it's a good crappie population, bluegill in the wintertime or whatever, or it's just a popular access point all year round. We don't want to create hurdles for those individuals that were already fishing for other things. And now in order to do it, they have to have a trout permit. I think it was kind of a fairness thing on that aspect.
Commissioner Escarina, with the question with regards to the type 2 locations where they've bought their own trout and stocked the lakes or the ponds or whatever they are for that time, are they going to continue to stock themselves, or will we make the contribution to stock those type 2 ponds or lakes or whatever they are? And will they be participating financially to help with that?
Well, typically every lake, I believe every lake that's a type 1 or a type 2 water body, that Wildlife and Parks is contributing towards the purchase of those trout.
Okay.
In some cases, those community fisheries cooperators that maybe a type 1 or a type 2 that aren't in our traditional trout contract, we still work with them with our CFAP lease agreements, access opportunity agreements.
Sure.
To kind of reimburse them for providing a winter fishing opportunity, which is trout. So we're paying for those trout in a couple of different ways.
Okay.
Sometimes they'll go above and beyond and buy extra trout.
Okay. That's my question.
Yeah.
I'm looking for avenues to save on the budget and, you know, maybe them, participate.
Yeah. Oh, can I speak further to that?
Sure.
So we recently had a conversation about reducing those CFAP lease agreements for those that we provide trout to.
Okay.
Based on the percentage that we contracted the season. So I think we reduced the season somewhere around 30%. So we reduced their contracts by 30% to save some money because of it.
Okay. All right. That helps. Thank you.
Yeah, a couple $100,000, I think.
Good.
Will that trout permit fee remain the same?
No, well, it could, but that's the one we're going to workshop
Yeah.
Okay,
from 12 to 1750.
thank you.
Yep. Can I go on to 115-2514, the reference document for water body specific regulations?
Yes, sir.
Sheila, we have some changes here. I don't know how we want to handle that, but for the first one, Cheney Reservoir Sawguy, we want to add a 21-inch minimum length limit to keep it the same as the existing walleye regulation because of identification concerns. But also we want a 2 per day creel, and that's not on your guys' form, but we're going to be asking for a 2 per day creel as well to remain consistent with walleye. Okay, the next one is Cheney Reservoir for crappie. We want to reduce that from a 50 per day down to 20 per day. This is based on increased population, increased angler harvest, and a survey of local anglers that the vast majority wanted to reduce it from 50 to 20. So that's that one. Several of these are blue catfish regulations to remove the 5 per day, 35-inch minimum length limit. I'll go back to blue cat because it's obvious that I skipped something here. Marion County Lake changed from a 13 to 18 slot to a 15-inch minimum length limit. That one's pretty cut and dried, less restrictive. Overbrook, again, another less restrictive regulation, changing from 2 per day, 15-inch minimum length limit to a 5 per day, no length limit. The rest of those you can see there if you have any questions, but I did want to go back up because I skipped the statewide length limit for blue catfish. Okay. The reason you see 4 blue cat changes below is because we'll be proposing to change the statewide blue catfish length and creel limits. Most of our managed blue catfish populations have gone to a 10 per day, 1/30 regulation. The statewide regulation is just 5 per day. No length restriction. Well, very few of our actual managed populations have that regulation anymore. So we just want to make the one that's the most common, the 10 per day, 1/30, the actual statewide regulation. Okay, so that's that one. And then I went over the reference document ones, but if you guys look through that list and have any other questions, I'd be happy to take them.
What is the criteria for changing the 50-day or 50 a day to 20 a day at Cheney Reservoir? Does it have to do with the survey that you conduct at the lake and feedback from the anglers? A number of things, or?
Yeah. This one's been a little challenging for us. So we've discussed it quite a bit, but the reality is it comes back to, do we have a biological concern or do we have a sociological concern?
Okay.
Typically we've just, with 50 a day, We understand there's been a lot of harvest, but based on our research, that just hasn't been a biological concern because they rebound so quickly. And in some cases, if you harvest a bunch, it actually makes the population grow better. But there is a sociological issue with the 50, and then we discussed that before at other commission meetings. So we did do an official survey at that water body, and the majority were in favor of it. So we may continue to do that at other water bodies.
Okay, that was my question because I've had some anglers that have approached me about Scott Lake in western Kansas and concerns about the creel being
Yeah.
taken out, their limits, and had asked me about pursuing the opportunity to reduce the numbers there. But I did talk to several people and they did tell me that they pretty much said that there's a lot of crappie in the lake and that it's reproducing and it's doing well. So they kind of helped me with that a little
Yeah.
bit. So anyway, that's why I was asking.
Okay.
Thank you.
You have a comment, Deputy Secretary Schreck?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I may, Brian, I hate to put you on the spot. I was going to ask you this yesterday when you were in my office, considering that the recent magazine came out with the annual fishing forecast being printed. You might, if you don't mind, kind of explain how different species are ranked and listed on that survey per property, per reservoir. My specific question is because I've gotten a phone call or two since that magazine came out, specifically about Cheney, and what Commissioner Escarino was asking. It sounds like they've been doing pretty good on crappie at Cheney, but yet you don't see Cheney show up in those rankings. I'm assuming that's because certain survey data was not available for that forecast. Is that
Correct.
okay?
Correct.
Thank you.
So just a general overview of how we do that. Typically we use either Wildlife and Parks or from a larger scale, American Fisheries Society standard methods for sampling these standard gear and methods for sampling these fish. So for largemouth bass, for example, we use electrofishing boats and a certain amount of area of the lake, shoreline area and time. How many fish we catch at Scott Lake, how many fish we catch at Cheney, how many fish we catch at Perry in a given hour, for example. And so that's what you're seeing on the forecast. Number one caught more of a quality fish, which is a 12-inch largemouth bass, than the one below it, and then so on and so forth. For walleye, we use gill nets, and it's how many fish you caught of a various size per gill net night, and that's what you're seeing in the forecast. If you see for the 21-inch category for walleye, you see a 5.01. That means at that lake, you're catching 5 big walleye per net. That may not mean much to the public. It's just a way for us to rank it and make it transparent to, what those populations look like. Cheney, though, for crappie, our method is fyke nets. They're these big trap nets. Cheney's shorelines are so shallow that it doesn't allow that gear to be an effective method. And so we can't include that information in the fishing forecast, but people find out about it. They share it word of mouth and it gains popularity that way. Yep.
Good. Thank you.
Yep.
I think we're now ready for Kansas River invasive carp summary by Chris Steffen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the commission. I'm Chris Steffen. I'm the Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator for Wildlife and Parks. I do have a presentation. Will this clicker run it, Jason? Yep. Okay. So it's a short presentation, kind of lining out the status and what we know about invasive carp in the Kansas River, and then a proposed snagging opportunity for discussion. So specifically, we're talking about bighead and silver carp. I'm going to use the term invasive carp to refer to both of those in combination. In the Kansas River, it's about 95% silver carp, looking at the two. So these are filter feeding fish, similar to our paddlefish that you might be more familiar with. They open their mouth and they swim through the water, and they're just eating the smallest particles of plankton out of the water. That's really important for the snagging opportunity later, because that means that it's nearly impossible to catch them on traditional gear with a baited hook or lure of some sort. These fish can be long-lived. We've had some in the upper 20s in Kansas that we've aged. The big heads get a little bit bigger, up to 118 pounds, which is the world record out of Grand Lake last year. The silver carp get more to like 60 pounds. In the Kansas River right now, what we're seeing are in the 15 to 20 pound range in the farther upstream above the water one weir, and below that, they're about 6 pounds. So there's a real size difference, and we'll talk a little bit about why here shortly. Depending on the water and the situation, there are documented cases where the presence of these fish causes declines of native fish over 90%. You've probably all seen videos of these things on YouTube. You run a boat through them. The silver carp specifically can jump. You'll see them, 6-8 feet in the air as you run a boat through them. So pretty dramatic. Is really unfortunate they're there, and we've got quite a few of them in the lower Kansas River. So very graphically, this is a native paddlefish at a location where they had some before and after pictures. These things are competing directly with those carp for plankton. It's just a real cut and dry way to show some of the impacts there. And then here we've got an example of the jumping carp. This is not an uncommon occurrence in locations where these things are abundant. Like I said, just the sound of the boat, or even if you're paddling through in a canoe and make a noise, it can kind of trigger one of these things to jump. And then it's kind of a domino effect where the whole school starts jumping because the fish next to them spook that one. And it just kind of, depending on where they land, can cause some damage. So I'm not sure if we can quite read this, but I'll go through it quick. The timeline on these carp, they were introduced to North America from Asia in the early 70s. They were used in aquaculture and research to clean out ponds, lagoons, just trying to have a fish in there that would do the job instead of using a chemical. Within a couple of years, they were found in the wild in Arkansas. So from there, we first documented them in Kansas in the late 80s. The big head carp in 87, and shortly after the silver in 91. So from Arkansas up the Mississippi, up the Missouri, and into the lower Kansas River in 15 years or so. And likely we didn't detect the first one either. They were probably here sooner. And so we had those fish there for quite a while, and they were kind of there, but not super abundant. And then in 2010, 2011, the numbers just absolutely exploded. In 2010, you could drive over the I-435 bridge and see a school of about 4 acres of 2-inch carp just stuck below that dam there in the river. And since then, they've maintained a high abundance in the lower part of the river. And I'm going to go through a few projects that we've taken on since that time. So here's a map of their distribution. I don't know if do I have a pointer here, Jason? I do. So this red up here is kind of what we're talking about today. They've fully infested the Missouri River and any tributary attached to it up to any sort of dam or other blockage. We've got them in the Kansas River up to the Bowersock Dam at Lawrence. We do have 6 records above that dam. They're older records. They're likely related to the 1993 flood, which allowed a few fish to pass at a time when we didn't have a lot of these fish. Since then, we haven't had many events we think would have allowed that passage. So one of our big concerns about these things is identification. They grow to 20 or 60 pounds, but they start small. And they're small and silvery and they look like bait and they act like bait and they catch fish. So if we have folks collecting bait, you can see in the middle is our native gizzard shad. Above and below are the two invasive carp. It's a real challenge for a lot of people. So the agency and nationally, there's been a lot of efforts, responses to the invasion of these fish. I'll applaud the commission in 1978. They were one of the first in the country to put these on a prohibited species list. We were many years ahead of Fish and Wildlife getting them on the federal injurious species list. There's been some larger national management plans designed, some basin specific ones. We've made some regulation changes over the years as we've recognized this threat. And then in the last 4 or 5 years, there's been real significant federal funding available to us to more directly take on this challenge. So again, we're talking about the Kansas River Basin today. It drains about the north half of the state of Kansas. It's actually one of the largest, first or second, depending on the source, prairie rivers in the world, meaning it has no water source from a mountain of any sort. The water in this river falls on the prairie. Third largest tributary to the Missouri River, fascinating place, really unique, something that we need to protect. And many of our reservoirs are on tributaries of the Kansas. So we're kind of going to zoom in just to the lower part of the Kansas River here. Specifically what we need to be talking about and know about. There's a dam at 15 miles above the confluence of the Missouri River. It's called the Water One Dam. It's got several other names. I'll try to be consistent with that name. And then 35 miles above that, we have the Bowersock Dam. So the carp stop at the Bowersock Dam. There's just those few old records I talked about. But even that Water One Dam stops a lot of fish much of the time. So this is the higher one, the one at Lawrence, the Bowersock. Hydropower facility. There's a facility on the north and south bank there. Really tall structure, really impassable for fish much of the time. And this one's lower. This is more of a structure to help slow the water for water intake for Johnson County. Like I said, it's got a lot of other names, the 435 Dam, the Edwardsville Dam, the Johnson County Weir. So if you're talking to constituents, you might get a lot of different names for that dam there. So one of the first projects we did is we wanted to know about these fish. You know, we don't have a lot of dedicated sampling on that river. It's been sporadic and not much since those carp really took off. And so what we found is we couldn't find any carp upstream of the Bowersock Dam, which is fantastic. You know, there is some recruitment in the Kansas River downstream of Water One Dam. That means those eggs are hatching, those fish are returning and becoming adults. Above that Water One Dam, we found very little evidence of that. So that's a good thing. You know, these fish, the way they spawn, they release their eggs, they float downstream, and then they hatch. And so there may not be enough miles of river between Bowersock and Water One for those fish to accomplish that most of the time. And another major finding was those fish in that section between the two dams have spent nearly or all of their life in that section of river. They're not leaving and coming back. They're just kind of between those two dams eating all the plankton. And so that led us to a couple conclusions. One, the Bowersock Dam is an incredibly important area for management of these carp. And we need to do everything we can to reinforce that as a barrier to upstream movement of these fish. And the other one was we have a real opportunity here where with this resident population of fish and low to no recruitment, removal could have a real impact between those two dams. So, you know, first, you know, foremost, make sure that the Bowersock Dam stays an impediment to fish. We did find that potentially at about 51,000 CFS, there's a small but potential movement of fish through this north powerhouse. So we worked with our federal partners and other states and explored technologies. How do we best keep these fish from making this jump up here? They're down here. We don't want them to get up here. Initially, we had gotten a lot of encouragement for an acoustic deterrent, which is just putting noise in the water to repel those fish. But there's a couple very large systems installed in the last 3 years, and logistically, we were encouraged to look at some other options. And so what we came up with, and this is a real rough drawing here, it's a system used in the upper Midwest to exclude fish. Essentially, they call them a headbanger. And it's a real descriptive way of saying when they try to jump, there's these metal bars that stick out, and they literally just are hitting those metal bars and falling back into the water from where they came. So we're looking to get something like that installed there. The city of Lawrence is on board with us. The folks with Bowersock Power and Mills are excited about this as well. We've done some initial work to make sure that the dam can hold this in place, and we've got grants in and submitted, and we'll have the funding to start final design and installation here this fall. Feel free to interrupt me at any point for questions. I'm happy to take them as I go here.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Are they both warm water, cold water type fish? What's their optimal environment?
So Mississippi River Basin is very analogous to the Yangtze River Basin, where they're native in China. So we've got them from Minnesota down into the Gulf of Mexico and the intercoastal waterway now. So they're very adaptable. And one thing I didn't mention is this other thing they do. So a lot of our native fish, they reproduce when the water temp gets to the right temperature. You know, crappie spawns 2 or 3 weeks long. These fish will put on eggs, and they're kind of waiting for a flow event. They want a little pulse of water to put those eggs out. And we've seen them spawn in the Missouri River Basin anytime between April and October. And they don't always put all the eggs out in one event. They might get a little bit of water now, release some eggs, hold on to some eggs, and we get a little pulse of water in October or September, and they'll release more eggs. So like any problematic invasive species, they're highly adaptable. So this is a picture of one of those deterrents. So you're kind of looking down through those teeth. I'd love to show you one, but they're a long ways away. This would be the first one in this area. So basically the water goes right through those teeth. The teeth are sloped. So if you get a log or a stick or anything on there, the water just kind of pushes it off the end. And so what you're doing is these things are sticking out 6 or 7 feet past that water. Those fish don't have the physical ability to leap out and over this thing. And also they come up through the water itself because that's just their habit. So really low tech, simple, fantastic solution. So we know we've got those sort of resident fish that are problematic there between the 2 dams. We're out there removing as many of them as we can. And this is yesterday, actually. So I apologize if I still smell a little bit like carp today. But we'd love to get you guys out if you want to see this in action sometime. These fish are all pushing 20 pounds. When we started at this location 2 years ago, they were about 7-pound fish. So whether, the way science works, we can't exactly claim all the benefit in that, but we haven't seen those size changes in the fish below water 1 or in the Missouri River. So anywhere in the Missouri River Basin right now, you go and look, the silver carp are all about 7 pounds. We have 18 to 20-pound fish where we've been removing fish. And I did update this slide. Everyone likes to say they caught a ton of fish. We actually caught a little over a ton yesterday. So we're getting pretty good at it.
Has anybody figured out a use for them?
There are some processing facilities. They're located in Illinois, Tennessee, and Kentucky. The states subsidize those catches for the most part. So the states guarantee a 10 or 15 cents a pound minimum, and then the processors pay over that if they have the market for them. Ironically, a lot of this gets processed and shipped back to China. So in our case, this is a lot of fish, but it's not enough. We haven't had anyone set something up here. And to process them for food, they spoil really fast. You have to get them on ice. Like you can put catfish in a semi and haul them for 2 or 3 days. These things have to be on ice within 2 hours or the flesh starts to get off on you. There are other efforts for fertilizer and those sorts of things. It's just a matter of logistics and scale. And then the other question is, if you do develop a market for this and you're trying to crash these populations, once you have that market, you kind of incentivize keeping them around. So it's a really catch-22 type of scenario. So here's just a graph showing the blue and the teal colored lines are places where we're not removing fish below that lower dam and on the Missouri River. And it just shows that where we're removing fish are much larger than those other areas now. One other project, we're working with Emporia State University, looking at how are these fish impacting our native species. There's a whole lot of really good science behind this, but basically what we're seeing here is these boxes kind of represent the types of food that the fish are eating. And you can compare them to where there are carp and are not carp. And basically those native fishes, and we're looking at 10 different species of native fishes. We're early in this project, but even so far, we're seeing that those fish are changing what they eat in the presence of those carp. So they're trying to find something that those carp aren't actually already eating. And this will help us in the future as we remove these carp. We would expect to see these diets shift back to a more natural state. And so kind of leading into the snagging proposal, we know this river's here, we know people use it, but we didn't know a lot more than that. Traditionally our creel surveys have happened on our reservoirs and other impoundments. So with some of the federal grant money that we got, we wanted to do a survey, how our constituents were interacting and viewing these invasive fish. So throughout 2022, we ran creels up and down just the lower 15 miles. So Call Point here is right at the confluence of the Kansas and Missouri rivers. Turner Boat is about 7 or 8 miles upstream. And then we're back to talking about Water One Dam here, which is 15 miles from the confluence. Those are the only 3 public access points on that 15 miles of river. And so as you would expect, all these white dots and blue dots are where the surveys took place. And even though we had a boat for the survey operator to run up and down the river and look for people, people are just really stacked at those 3 locations. And in fact, it's a pretty shocking number. We had about 80,000 angling trips in this 15 miles of river. You can compare that to our most popular and largest reservoir, Milford, has about 120,000. So Milford has, I don't know, 15 or 20 access points throughout the lake for people. I mean, for boat ramps, much less all that shoreline to fish. And we've got 80,000 people at just these 3 boat ramps, essentially. And it's not easy. This Water One Dam, there is public access to walk through here down to the river. There's nowhere to park. There's no public access on the south side. So folks are paying to park at that gas station there, and they're walking about 7/10 of a mile to fish. And we still see incredible usage at that site. So we really learned a lot in that study about the river use, things that we just didn't have data for. So this graph here is we asked people how they perceive and interact with those invasive carp. Blue is kind of a favorable view of the carp, and red is unfavorable. And then we've got one that's kind of neither. So the one that's favorable is using them as bait. We have a lot of really large blue catfish, flathead catfish, and they like a big chunk of bait. And so a lot of these people are using these invasive carp as bait because they're abundant there. Which is why this kind of jump in my boat's sort of neutral, because it's, if you're looking for one for bait and it just jumps in your boat, you know, it's a win. On the flip side, if it jumps in your boat and breaks a fishing pole or a light, or, you know, I've got a friend, his wife won't ride in the boat with him anymore. She's had that experience one too many times. You have that unfavorable view. So it's more of a mixed bag than we might think, but, we were encouraged that there are folks that want to both eat these and use them as bait, and they're very abundant, and we'd be happy to have them, get them out of the river for us. And so, right now, it's not legal to snag at that location. The way our snagging seasons are set up, it's specific locations and only for 2 months during the paddlefish season. There is snagging going on here. I'll say that, we know that, but it's currently not legal. They could legally catch these bow fishing, rod and reel, which is incredibly difficult, or with a cast net, all of which are relatively ineffective compared to snagging. So snagging is just putting a big hook on with a weight and just ripping it through the water, trying to get that hook to catching a fish. Which is what we do for paddlefish, since they're not going to hit a lure or bait. So we had staff go out there. There was a lot of concern about, well, what else might we snag? There's a lot of people already fishing there. Can it accommodate another activity? So we took a couple different committees of the fisheries division out and just let our people snag. So we had some real data on what this would look like. And here's that data. You know, everyone likes to think that you would catch a whole ton of fish snagging, but it's incredibly physical. And most of our folks, after 30 or 45 minutes, were pretty physically spent. So if you look at this as like, we had a catch rate of about 1.4 fish per hour. You could go and do a lot of other types of fishing with a higher success rate. So it's not like you're out there catching a ton of fish. About 2/3 of the fish caught were those invasive carp. But we did have some other fish on there, some channel catfish and a lot of gar. Interestingly, we had a couple paddlefish that our staff snagged at that location, and that's something to, you know, think about maybe further down the road. Is, you know, we didn't know those were necessarily there, but they are. You know, they're throughout the Missouri Basin. We just don't have good data at this location. So generally, those committees talked it through, and we're really supportive of, you know, if it's mostly going to be these invasive silver and big head carp, let's explore the idea of a snagging season. And so that's what I'm presenting here to you all today. And this is what's in the packet here, the actual how we would propose this working. So we would want to allow it from that Water One weir, Water One dam downstream to the confluence with the Missouri River. That's that 15 miles with 3 access points. We would like to limit harvest to just those 2 invasive big head and silver carp. They've got that kind of funny eye below their mouth that makes them at a larger size pretty easy to identify compared to, say, a native buffalo or some other fish that folks are less familiar with. We would, as we have for other snagging areas, barbless hooks. So if they do catch non-carp species, survival of those fish will be very high, well over 90%. The barbless hooks, I think Nick will probably talk a little bit about barbless hooks and snagging, but basically, you know, without that barb, the hook just comes right back out. It's just a small little hole. Generally doesn't have any lasting effect on the fish. So we'd like this to be open year round. We know those fish are there pretty much all the time. No special permit. We just want to, you know, have this opportunity for folks to utilize these fish. And as we want them to take out as many as they can, we would suggest no creel or possession limit on those fish. And the last reg is an existing reg. These fish are on our prohibited species list, so you cannot possess them live. And we would suggest that maintain in place for this opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Chris, I've got a question for you. Have you considered whether to include recommendations for euthanizing and disposing of those fish if you do promote the snagging?
Yes, we want to do kind of one of those Creel type evaluation surveys afterwards, but we would, in announcing and presenting this opportunity, provide information on ethical methods of euthanization of those fish
And dispose.
and disposal. And the survey would be to follow up and ask people what they did with the fish when they encountered them.
Is there a paddlefish snagging season on that river?
No, not
Okay.
not on the Kansas River.
Further questions from the commission? Other comments or questions? Yes, sir.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Brian Sowers, Fisheries Division Director, but we have in regulation the proper disposal methods.
Okay.
So it's clear in regulation as opposed to just a sign.
Okay, because I was looking at the invasive, because it talks about you cannot possess a live fish and you cannot release a live fish, so
Right.
just kind of closing the loop in terms of the available recommendations.
Right. Okay.
Further comments on this report? Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. And I have one more short item here for you while I'm here. For 115.710, for AIS designated waters, unfortunately, in December, we did confirm zebra mussels at Gardner City Lake. And therefore would like to add that to that list of AIS designated water bodies. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we need to take action on that, Dan? Okay, perfect. Okay, now we have sport fish versus non-sport fish regulation from Nick Kramer.
Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners, for allowing me to speak to you all today on this topic. I am Nick Kramer. I'm a district fisheries biologist and regional habitat coordinator stationed at Perry Reservoir. I'm also the chair of our Alternative Fisheries Committee. This is a committee that oversees methods such as snagging, bow fishing, gigging, and spearing, the regulations that impact those methods and the fishes that are targeted by those methods. And this is in the agenda and is introduced as sport fish versus non-sport fish regulations, but perhaps a better way to understand these regulation changes that I'm going to be talking about is clarification of wanton waste or our possession regulations as it pertains to our non-native or as it pertains to our native non-sport fish. And so we have two different regulations on our books that deal with possessing and processing of fish. We have 115.7.4. The font or the text I'm going to focus on is the enlarged font, point B. This 7-4 says that each person who has taken any fish shall retain the fish in that person's possession until any of the following occurs. Keyword any fish. It has to stay in their possession until processed, transported, given away, all the normal stuff that's in our possession regulations. We also have 115.18.8, which deals with the retrieval and possession of game, animals, sport fish, and migratory game birds. And this point B says each game animal, sport fish, keyword sport fish, or migratory game bird retrieved shall be retained until any of the following, also including the same processed, consumed, given away, transported to a commercial place of preservation. So we have two regulations that deal with possession and in effect wanton waste. Well, one applies to any fish and one applies to just sport fish. And they all mention consumption, processing, transported to a person's home, transported to a place of commercial preservation, given to another person. The only difference is that 115.7-4 mentions that you can return the fish unrestrained to the water or dispose of it as a designated disposal location. But the big main difference, which could cause a gray area in a potential enforcement, is the any fish versus not sport fish. These are basically the same regulations, just one protects any fish, one protects just sport fish. So what falls into this gray area? It's our non-sport fish. And this isn't just a hypothetical gray area. This is a recreation of a screenshotted conversation that was shared on Facebook several years ago between a member of the public who asked our Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks Game Warden Facebook page, are non-game fish under the same wanton waste law as sport fish? And whoever manages that Facebook page replied back, wanton waste applies just to sport fish. This person then posted that to one of the various Kansas Facebook angling groups. I saw that several months later as the algorithm fed it to me. And then I shared that screenshot with the game wardens. And again, before I went down this rabbit hole of regulations, incorrectly asked them which statute deals with wanton waste of non-game fish. I'll blow up their response. They corrected me that it was a regulation, and that regulation is 115.18.8, but it's specific to game animals, sport fish, and migratory game birds. And they eventually picked up on what I was kind of asking and said, if this is something where people can kill carp and gar and throw them in a ditch, there is no wanton waste. You could possibly charge littering. And this isn't just game wardens or whoever manages that Facebook page being having a misconception about our regulations. This is an excerpt of the commission meeting minutes from April 17th of 2003, when our former fisheries chief, Doug Nygren, mentioned that no fish are currently covered by wanton waste regulations. And while presenting a regulation that would add white perch to non-sport status to be excluded from wanton waste. This is about 2 months before sport fish was added to 115.18.8. Prior to 2003, it was just a hunting regulation. So ahead of that inclusion of sport fish to 115.18.8, our former fisheries chief, Doug Nygren, wanted to add white perch to non-sport fish so they wouldn't be protected by wanton waste. So there's been this misconception. It's almost like nobody knows that 115.7-4 exists and that all fish are protected by wanton waste and fall under the possession regulations. And our former fisheries chief, Doug, introduced sport fish to the regulation in 2003, but 115.7-4 has been effective since December 26th of 1989. So it's been on the books for quite a while. So why does all this matter? Why do non-sport fish need protected? Chris just talked about opening up snagging for bighead and silver carp, and they are two of our non-sport fish. Here we have our definition of non-sport fish in 115.1-1. Non-sport fish means common carp, silver carp, bighead carp, black carp, grass carp, drum, threadfin, and gizzard shad, goldfish, gar, suckers including carp suckers, and buffalo, eel, sturgeon, goldeye, white perch, and bowfin. Now, Chris talked about silver carp and bighead carp being non-native invasives. We add in, change the color of the non-natives to red. And we see that about half or over half of our fish that are considered non-sport are non-native. A lot of those native fish that are left over are talked about in a little bit, but some of these include just the generic term of sturgeon. We have the federally endangered pallid sturgeon that swims in the Missouri and Kansas rivers that under this definition and under some interpretations of our wanton waste and possession laws could just be thrown in a ditch and be charged with littering if they get caught. We also have American eel, which spawned in the Sargasso Sea, drifts all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, swims up the Mississippi River, Missouri River, and into the Kansas River before they're found in Kansas. So there's these very, very charismatic fish such as those, but we also have a bunch of these non-native rough fish is what we called them in the past that are lumped into this. And a lot of these native non-sport fish that we have left over traditionally have been relatively understudied. A lot of former fisheries managers have even taken to throwing them on the shore themselves. But a lot more recent focus has been, a lot more recent research has been focused on these fish. And they're finding that these fish can live a really long time. A lot of these fish reach 20 years of age, relatively common, The big mouth buffalo, about 5 years ago was found, to be 112 years old, and this was validated with bomb radiocarbon dating. So it wasn't just, somebody miscounting the number of rings, this was validated. So these fish can live for a really long time. And they're not just long-lived fish, but they also take a long time to reach sexual maturity. A lot of these fish don't reach sexual maturity until a lot of our traditional sport fish are dying off of old age. Freshwater drum don't become sexually mature until 5, where a smallmouth buffalo don't become mature until 9 or 11 years of age. And then on top of that, some of these fish exhibit irregular recruitment or irregular spawning. They might not spawn every single year for one reason or another. They might just not produce eggs some years, or if they do have eggs, they might not release them due to environmental stressors. And if they do release them, their spawn might not be successful due to possible not the floodplain not being inundated or other natural conditions. So because of all these fish they're not easily replaced when they're removed from the system. So what do we propose? To protect all fish, especially our native non-sport fish, under both possession and wanton waste regulations. And to go about doing that, we start with removing the definitions of sport and non-sport fish from 115.1-1, just striking those from that section. And then we went through the regulations and figured out what those deletions would impact. So in 115.7-1, which deals with legal equipment and methods of taking fish, we again removed sport and non-sport references, and then we added a list of species that can be targeted with gears if they're not open to all gears. So currently 115.7-1 is broken into sections A and B, if I remember correctly. A deals with the methods that are legal for sport fish. B deals with the methods that are legal for non-sport fish. Since we're striking those definitions, we have to add in the gears that are only legal for non-sport fish into section A and then reference which species are legal for take. 115.7-2 is just the general provisions. It talks more about some definitions of the gears and methods. So again, we remove the references to sport and non-sport fish. And then there's a section that talks about snagging, and we added the list of species that can be snagged in the waters posted or designated as open to snagging. And then we get into the possession regulations. 115.7-4, we removed sport fish and non-sport fish were referenced. And then we added a line that common carp and prohibited species may be returned dead to the water from which they were taken. And 115.7-4 was pretty straightforward with the changes because it was already geared towards fish. 115.18.8 was the same way. We removed sport and non-sport references, then added that common carp and prohibited species may be returned dead to the water from which they were taken. But 115.18.8 also has a line that says nothing in this subsection shall prohibit the catch and release of live sport fish. This one we discussed at length and ultimately settled on changing the wording to nothing in this subsection shall prohibit the catch and release of live fish caught using hook and line, trout line, set line, tip ups, hand fishing, snagging, and float lines. Now, if you know or are aware of all of our legal gears that we have or legal methods of take that we have, you might realize that this excludes spearing, gigging, and bow fishing. So if these changes are accepted, then anglers or bow fishers would no longer be able to shoot and release fish that were bow fish, gigged, or speared. And this is largely due based off of a study that was done in Oklahoma. It started in 2021 and published in 2023. So this graph shows, see if the laser goes, estimated cumulative mortality. So how many fish die is on this y-axis, and time since shot is on the x-axis. So the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation went out with bow fishers, experienced bow fishers on the front of their boats. They shot fish, put them in aerated holding tanks while they were out on the water, and then brought them back to onshore tanks. Water was circulated from the lake into those tanks, throughout the period of 5 days. They tracked mortality every 3 hours and noted the mortality of these fish over time. So 3 hours after these fish were shot, about 33% or 1/3 of the fish were already dead after 3 hours. Move to 24 hours, you're up to 2/3 of the fish are dead. By 5 days, 87% of all fish are dead that were shot and retrieved with bow fishing gear. Breaking that down a little further by their species, they had 240 fish that were shot. Only 208 of those fish died. So that gets the 87% mortality right there. But a lot of these have 100% mortality. River carp sucker, which are very common in Kansas. Flathead catfish, they only shot one of those. We have exceptions to you can't shoot catfish on waters that have a length limit in Kansas. Short-nosed gar had 100% mortality, and freshwater drum had 100% mortality. The 100% are usually the groups where they had very few fish that were shot, but they still had high mortality in all of these groups. The lowest one is spotted gar at 79% mortality, which is still extremely high. And it's not just that they're killing a lot of fish. A lot of these fish are very old aged. The black buffalo, 90% of the fish died, and the average age was 30 years old. So a lot of very old fish being taken out of the system that are not easily replaced. So why does it, oh, I forgot, had a box that emphasized all that. So why does it matter? Why do non-sport fish need protection? I'll go back to this basic North American model of wildlife conservation. Has 7 tenets that we base a lot of our regulation and management of our fish and wildlife on. And one of these tenets is that wildlife can be killed only for a legitimate purpose. And some bow fishers might argue that by shooting gar and buffalo that they're doing a great service to our sport fish by removing these fish that muddy up our waters or kill off a lot of our game fish. But in defense of buffaloes is what the cutoff title says. I present another study based out of Iowa that was published very recently that looked at the annual changes in water quality and sport fish community structure following the harvest of common carp and bigmouth buffalo. And in these natural lakes of Iowa, they had commercial harvesters remove between 9 and 63 pounds of common carp and bigmouth buffalo per acre per year in these systems. And what they found was that it had relatively few effects on the changes to sport fishes, did not affect changes to blue-green algae or chlorophyll A concentrations. It did not significantly affect aquatic plant density or richness. And these removal efforts were not associated with changes in nitrogen or phosphorus concentrations. So removing buffalo and carp did not really benefit the system at all. And in defense of gars, the biggest complaint about gars is they eat all the sport fish. This is a study out of Oklahoma. They looked at the diets of 46 long-nosed gar and found 2 freshwater drum, 6 skithered shad, 5 red shiners, 1 bluegill, 1 black bullhead. These are not the number of stomachs that had those items in it. Those are the total number of fish that were in those stomachs. What they actually found was that a lot of the stomachs were empty. I believe it was over half. And that's the same as what a bunch of other studies have found, that multiple studies have found that most of these gars have empty stomachs. They're not out there just gorging themselves on all of our native or non-native sport fish. And those that tend to have fish tend to eat what is most abundant. They're just a natural control to overpopulation, benefiting the system and not hurting it. So to wrap all this up, many of our non-sport fish are native fishes. They are long-lived, late maturing, have irregular recruitment, and some are experiencing population declines. But current interpretations of our regulations do not protect these fish from wanton waste. So we propose this clarification of wanton waste regulations and limitation of catch and release to listed years. And with that, I thank you for allowing me to present this to you today. If you have any questions, you can reach me at these methods below.
Commissioners have questions? I'd ask a question. During the previous presentation, Chris talked about snagging with barbless hooks. Is there data on survivability of non-accidental snagging. So if you're purposely trying to snag a fish using barbed hooks and releasing.
Yes, and I anticipated the question, and I guess I ran out of time to pull the exact numbers up, but as Chris kind of mentioned, a lot of these studies have found that if you use barbless hooks, the mortality is very low for snagging. A lot of these snagging hooks are maybe an inch of, in 1/8 of an inch thick, so they're a lot smaller than the arrow or the barb of a bow fishing gear. Their mortality is a lot lower. My experience is more with paddlefish with snagging. You know, part of my master's thesis, we looked at some stress related to snagging of paddlefish, and some of these paddlefish are completely unfazed by snagging, even by gaffing. So snagging is a lot less intrusive and has a lot lower mortality than the bow fishing does.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments?
Are you letting anybody commercial fish for corporate oil in Kansas? Is there anybody doing it? They used to.
Yeah, there is one commercial fisher. I believe his contract is almost up though. And I'm not sure which water he's on right now. He was at Milford for a long time. He was on the Kansas River not too long ago, but I'm not sure which reservoir he's on at the moment.
He did do some at Sebelius at one time, but they're not continuing that, or you guys aren't, or is it up to them, or?
Yeah, I guess I do not know for sure. Brian would have a better answer.
Yeah, Brian Soward's Fisheries Division Director. Yes, as Nick alluded to, we have 1 year left in his contract, and then I think he's going to retire. So at that point, we'll reevaluate the usefulness of that commercial fisherman. We only allow one in the state. And so we're going to, because of a lot of these topics here, we're going to reevaluate that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, we're at the workshop session. Is this a time people want to take a 10-minute break? Something like that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair.
Very good. We'll do that. Thank you. Come back about 1:40, give or take. shop session.
Whoever made
Thank you. We good, Jason?
That's a big guy too. Very good. Yep. And see that was.
As previewed earlier, we're going to talk about the trout permit cost. We had a discussion about the season change as well, but now Brian Sowers is going to talk to us about the proposed change in the cost.
Well, thank you for setting that up for me, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Brian Sowards, Fisheries Division Director. Yes, again, we'll talk about this. This will be the first workshop for increasing a proposal to increase the trout permit. And the impetus behind that, as you remember from the general discussion, now I'm having trouble, like. Not right. Got it. Was due to the trout costs. Again, we do not produce our own rainbow trout in our hatchery systems. We buy those from commercial vendors, and the price has gone up over time and exponentially here in the last couple of years, whether that's gas prices, commodities, whatever it is, it's gone up exponentially in the last couple of years. The last time it did that was in 2016. And you can see the price has gone from an average of 157 per fish to 353 today for a fish. So in 2016, the last time, you could see where the trout numbers dip. They're in blue. That shows the total numbers of trout we stocked. I won't use baby blue next time. I can't see that very well. But you can see we responded to that 2016 increase by decreasing the overall trout numbers that we stocked. But it didn't seem prudent to do that again because there's only so many trout you can reduce it to before the whole program tanks. So we tried to find palatable solutions to maintain the program and still provide a reasonable opportunity for trout anglers out there. The blue here, the bars show the trout permit revenue, license revenue from trout permits over time, very steady, around $120,000 a year. In the red shows the program cost, the expense of trout by year. So revenue remains solid, remains steady, but the overall cost of the program going up, though again, not a sustainable model. So our proposal here is for 115.21 amount of fees to increase the trout permit cost from $12 a permit to $17.50. And with the $2.50 transaction fee, it'll make that an even $20 where it was $14.50. For the youth permit, we're not proposing any change to that one. That allows folks, kids under 16 years old. They typically didn't need this until a couple of years ago, but because of the cost of the program, wanting to count those towards our certified anglers, we started charging a $4.50, I believe it is, youth permit. Is that accurate? Scott, John, $4.50, something like that for the youth permit? Okay. So anyway, this proposal does not affect the youth permit. Okay. So give you an idea of what that $17.50 will get you as a trout angler. In 2011, the cost for a 5-fish creel limit, a stringer of 5 trout that you can have each day, cost about $7.85 to the department. Today, it costs about $17.65 just for 5 rainbow trout, 1 day's limit. So all we're proposing is to go up to the essentially a 1-day limit cost for that trout permit. That's all I have. Thank you.
I got a couple of questions.
Okay. Yes, sir, Commissioner.
Is raising trout an option for us? I'm just curious. Can we not do it?
We can. Typically, we have the last few years taken trout from a commercial vendor, held them in our facilities and grew them up. And we're very good at that. But that still costs quite a bit and takes up space. But we've typically reserved our facilities and our very limited hatchery space for highly preferred species in the state. Walleye, largemouth bass, saugeye, channel catfish. We want to spend that space wisely.
I was just curious if we done like a cost benefit analysis on that, raising our own, producing our own, but I
Yeah.
understand the demand for the other species as well.
We have not done a cost benefit analysis on raising them our own though.
Yes, Commissioner, space wouldn't allow for it right now. And when you think about the hatchery space that we have and how much we're dedicating to striped bass, walleye, just as Brian said.
Yeah, which I'm sure that's a more in-demand species for the state of Kansas.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we keep track of that. I feel very well with the licensed angler surveys we do every few years. With creel surveys we do on individual reservoirs. I think we've got a pretty good idea of preferred species in the state.
Yeah, so if I heard correctly, I was informed that the trout producers are they're dwindling in this region, not just, in our state, Missouri, Kansas, but in the region. And I don't know what the future of that program is going to look like.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brett.
Brian, is there a cap on that trout permit, and what is that if there is?
This is not a statutorily, this particular permit is not listed in statute. There is no statutory cap.
Okay.
It's regulation only, I believe. Jake told me that too, so I think we're good.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, Commissioner Escarino, is there are we going to keep stocking with the same amount that we've stocked in the past, or will we be growing the number of, putting more fish in with the anticipated increase in charges?
I will tell you, we've changed a lot of things in the past year. We decreased the number that we stocked, but we did it from December to March. So essentially we stocked a very similar amount per month, essentially.
Yes.
We just constricted that time frame. Time will tell. We're not planning on increasing the amount we stock unless
Okay.
revenue goes up as a
Sure.
result of some of these changes.
Right. Well, that's what I was asking, to make
Yep.
sure that okay.
Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Gefeller had something.
Very good. Commissioner, welcome.
Thank you. Commissioner Escarino asked the question I was going to ask about whether there were plans to reduce numbers further or increase numbers. I think the angler experience is the increase in the fee will be more palatable if the experience is a good experience.
Agree.
Good point.
Further comments or questions? Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
We now have military deer seasons. Levi Jaster. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Levi Jaster, Emporia Research and Survey Office. I am going to talk about our military deer seasons, which is KR 115-25-9A. This regulation is separate from our statewide deer season regulations to allow for more time to work with our military cooperators at Smoky Hill, Fort Riley, and Fort Leavenworth to change or adjust the deer seasons on those properties in response to whatever their mission needs are, but still provide that additional hunting opportunity at those locations. So with that, generally, the dates change for the seasons that they're asking for, but for a lot of our major either sex seasons, the number of days that they have will stay the same. It's just adjusts when those days occur on that location, which can actually provide additional opportunity for some hunters to take advantage of all the seasons. But starting with Fort Riley, in addition to the pre-rut antlerless season, they're asking for November 29th through December 1st of 2024 as additional antlerless whitetail deer only firearms hunting. Their open firearm season would be December 14th through December 22nd. And then they would have the 5 additional antlerless only whitetail permits valid in at the Fort Riley Subunit 8A. For Fort Leavenworth, Subunit 10A, their open firearm season would be November 16th through November 17th, November 23rd to November 24th, November 28th through December 1st, and December 7th through December 8th, and then December 14th through December 15th. At Fort Leavenworth, they also want to take advantage of the extended antlerless season in January. So they want January 1st of 2025 through January 19th of 2025. And then also the extended archery season for antlerless whitetail deer only from January 20th through January 31st. That's the Smoky Hill subunit. Their open firearm season would be December 4th through December 15th, which is basically the statewide season. And then also to include the additional 5 antlerless whitetail deer permits at Smoky Hill, which is the subunit 4A. And so that would be the military subunit exceptions to the statewide seasons. And all other statewide seasons, they'd follow what the statewide dates would be. And I would take questions.
Questions from the commission?
Okay, Mr. Chairman,
thank you.
we do want to ask for permission to go ahead and forward this into the promulgation process so we can get it voted on here soon.
Very good. I would understand that as a request for a motion. Is there a motion?
Do we need a motion or just a consensus, Dan?
That'd be
Consensus?
fine. It's good that it's in the record, so a motion would be appropriate. Basically, you're just authorizing it to move from the workshop phase into the promulgation phase, so the language will be started in the process, but a motion would be fine for that purpose.
Okay.
Commissioner Searle, I move that we move this, this regulation forward.
Commissioner Spore, I second.
Any discussion? I don't mean to ignore our commissioners online as well. If you have comments, but if no questions or comments, then I would ask for all those in favor to say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. I think you're now up for Carcass movement. Is that right, Levi?
Yes, sir, it is. I'm not gonna say a whole lot here with this today. We're still continuing review of what's going into this. It's kind of a, we're trying to make lemonade out of sewage water here. That's kind of the situation that we're trying to deal with. It's a rough one. But we do need to continue to refine some definitions and define some terms. We're finding some stuff that isn't defined elsewhere that we got to look into. After some discussion with law enforcement, we'll likely bring back the 30-mile buffer around the units. But we're still reviewing this and we'll continue to do so. So I don't have a whole lot else here.
Very
So I
good.
would take questions.
Any questions on this subject?
Levi, I have 2 as I have pondered this. This addresses deer. Elk. Now, I realize the scale, the number of animals we're talking about is extremely different. And I also realize that most hunters aren't just gonna drop an elk in the bed of the pickup and head home to butcher it. So there's a couple of things that are significantly different. However, for the consistency, because it is elk are cervids and susceptible, do we need to consider expanding this to include it? The elk unit size there in 2, which is the place where well, all of them would still be an issue. But I mean, in 2, you can drag it out.
Yep.
Around the state. So can you address where elk may or may not fit in this?
Well, and that's why we did define wild cervid. So it's any member of the family Cervidae. So that would not just be
Okay.
white-tailed deer or mule deer. It would include elk, potentially moose, should we ever have a huntable population of moose, or any of those type of species. And that's also why we spoke specifically to, in that section B, the export, spoke specifically to 115-4-6, which is the deer unit regulation. So it would still limit elk to the unit, the deer unit that it's harvested in. Till we realize the elk units are vast, but we want to maintain that limited travel there. So that was why we called specifically to that regulation in text.
Excellent. Thank you for that explanation. The other thing, and I know we're still fairly early, I'm not hearing much from the public one way or the other on this. And thinking about comments that folks have made, I think our sportsmen need to be responsible and so, inform themselves about things that are happening, but I'm also still a little concerned that this is potentially impactful to a number of hunters, and yet we're not hearing from them. Do we need to take any, make note of this on the website that it's being discussed, or make any other public notification so that people are aware the topic's on the table?
Yes, and we recognize that not just the discussion here, but also once we're a little more settled on where it could end up, that it's going to take a major education effort to let people know about it and how to work within it too. In some sense, I think it might be a little soon until we've maybe got this more settled as to where it should be before we really publish it or push it out, but we certainly do need to, and I'm sure we'll be working with our public relations or public affairs folks to get this pushed out. So, Mr. Chair, if I may, Deputy Secretary Schrog, just because this came up at the last commission meeting, question about how taxidermists fall into this conversation, that is part of the ongoing conversation and us trying to vet this a little bit better. So I just wanted you all to be aware that that specific taxidermist related issue is being discussed still. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm afraid that we're missing the heart of the conversation. Many of these strategies that we're bringing forth are really to try to begin to head off and address chronic wasting disease. And I've challenged our biologists to kind of go back and look at what is the status in Kansas. Where is it most prevalent? There are a whole host of strategies that we could utilize to address that disease itself. But, we have to work, to help educate you all, to help educate our governor. And then I would like them to look at that whole list of strategies, and then together we all figure out, okay, what's palatable? What can our hunters tolerate here in the state of Kansas? And so for me, I'm just afraid that we're talking about one strategy at a time when we really should be looking at a whole list of strategies and thinking about how do we move forward holistically from there.
Very good. I personally, I think at the appropriate time when we have clarity on a regulation, engaging the taxidermists and the processors with public notification, perhaps even give recommendations of signage that could post at their facilities that kind of give notice to people who walk in the door, oh, I need to follow these rules for movement and removal of cervids in the state of Kansas, but that's a down the road issue. Any further comments?
I continue to think about Laura's comment about the family that processes deer at Sawyer. Is that right? And I keep thinking about how many they do a year. It's hundreds, and how this is going to affect them, and how it's going to affect the deer hunters. This is a huge deal for those people. And you mentioned that 2 years ago, that this was going to be an issue, and I just keep bringing that up. But I would hope it would be 100 miles and not 30. I just think that when it does hit the public and it becomes law, I think it's a problem for law enforcement, and I think it's going to be a problem for everybody. I just, something to think about.
Thank you. Additional comments? Thank you, Levi.
Thank you.
I believe we now have legal counsel with no presentation. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. Just a little word of explanation. The category of pending regulations is kind of the catch-all for regulations that have gotten the commission's blessing in terms of the promulgation process, but have not yet completed that process and come back to the commission for public hearing.
Yep.
So that's what those 7 regulations are. As a matter of fact, the first 4 on the list, the invasive or aquatic invasive species regulations, I had before the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations this morning. When I first got to Salina, Jason hooked me up remotely with that committee meeting. So those have been through JCAR now, and they will be immediately coming back to the commission for approval. The rest of the list are regulations that are scattered throughout the process, either at the Department of Administration or the Attorney General's office, or finishing up the loop and coming back up through JCAR. So that's all the explanation I have, and really all there is to say about those in that pending category, unless somebody's got questions.
Thank you. There are questions for legal counsel? Define waiting on edits.
Excuse me?
Waiting on edits.
That means it's working through the process. That's what the promulgation process basically is. It's a series of edits for different reasons, language and consistency with the standards of regulations with the Department of Administration based on legal review for the Attorney General's office. And if it qualifies for the budget review based on the impact from a monetary basis, then the budget office does the same thing at their stage of the process.
Dan, so is it my understanding then those first 4 will be up for public hearing at the next meeting then?
Most likely, yes, because the JCAR tends to be the last part of the process, the promulgation, before they come back to the commission for public hearing.
So if we have public hearing and there's some debate or questions with regards to how that works, will that come back to us for a vote, or will we vote on it at the next meeting?
No, that they'll end up on the agenda as soon as they clear the process.
Okay.
Which, like I say, will probably be within the next week or 10 days since those are at that stage. And Sheila will get them on the next available agenda for the public hearing, and then they'll come back to you. And at that point, you'll have a vote in terms of whether they are approved as the official version of the regulation. Although then at that point, they go back to the Secretary of State's office because they have to be published once again before they take effect.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Deputy Secretary Schrag, I can see the wheels turning in Commissioner Spore's mind, and I know I may get some phone calls about this. So I feel like a little further explanation on specifically like 115.826, the public lands waterfowl regulation. That was sent on to the promulgation process to Department of Administration. They sent back requesting us to make edits, and whether that be a comma in the wrong spot or a period in the wrong spot. So we've been going back and forth with Department of Admin on that. You feel like that's an accurate description, Dan?
Yeah.
So that's a little more detail on awaiting edits explanation. So thought I'd clarify. Thank you.
Additional comments? Thank you very much. Agenda item number 7, second bite of the apple for public comments, non-agenda items. Is there anyone who's been remotivated to come up and speak? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Norman Mantle again. On our lakes and our public property, we've got these mountain bike trails. They're causing erosion problems. Once that cover is gone, you got erosion problems. The soil ends up in the river, it ends up in the lake. They are dredging some of the boat ramps at Milford now, and they dredged it and it's already sealed it back shut. So you need to shut down the trail rides because it's causing erosion problems. Us farmers, we're doing no-till to keep the cover on. Yet we're allowing them to do this for recreation? That's wrong.
Thank you. Point in the agenda for old business to bring up today. Other business.
We need to talk about meetings. And when we're gonna have one. We have June set, and that's all.
Yep.
I really need to get down the weeds so I can find locations. So we need to decide on whether we are gonna have an August meeting or not. And, or move that to September, or have whatever we need, so.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Sheila, at this point, my recommendation would be to go ahead and schedule an August meeting.
Okay.
Just due to the number of regulations that we have in process that most likely are going to be looking for an opportunity for a hearing.
Okay.
So
So what are we looking at date wise? That's Thursday. We're looking at the calendar.
The 29th of August.
August 29th. That's the last Thursday of August. Will that work?
I always recommend as late in the month as possible,
Right.
just because we're usually counting days and notice for regulation purposes. So the 29th is a good number.
Okay. Our June meetings in Hayes, I was thinking about Independence because somebody gave me a good location there that might work. So does Independence work for everybody? For August 29th?
Comments from the commissioners? That's certainly fine with me, but very good.
I'll try to see if I can get that location there.
Sheila, remind me, our June meeting, is it the 20th or the 27th?
It's the 20th.
Yeah.
It is a week early because of some other meetings at the end of the month. And it's in Hayes at the Hilton Garden Inn and Convention Center.
Yeah, the meeting is the Thursday before.
So Independence, it sounds like.
Do we want to set September 2 or we want to wait? See if we need a September.
I think we should wait.
Okay, we can wait till the next meeting, but then we'll have to set it at the next meeting if we decide to, so it gives me
Thank you, Sheila.
time. Thank you.
Sheila, is that all you need from us at this
That's all I
moment?
need. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I believe we're at the end of the agenda. I wanted to make a comment about how much I appreciate you all making me feel welcome up here at the table, my commissioners, the staff, all of you in the audience. I respect the fact that the people working in the field with wildlife and parks, taking time out of your day to come to these meetings and having the expertise when questions come up for us or for others at the table, that we have the people here who can respond. And I do appreciate that. If the other commissioners have concluding comments, feel free to make them. I'll start down here with you, Commissioner Storer. Anything to say for the good of the order? Mr. Cross?
I have no additional comments.
I did mean to say kudos to fisheries. Lots of press that I've seen on your carp removals. So it's been fun to see positive things in the newspaper. I forgot to say that earlier, so thank you.
No comments.
Okay. Comments from our commissioners online?
Nothing
No,
from me. Thank
nothing
you.
from me.
Thank you for your participation. With that, I believe we're adjourned.